Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Environment Select Committee. I'm Councillor Tom Bennett, and I'm the chairman of the committee. I'll be chairing tonight's meeting. The event is being streamed live on YouTube, and members of the public and media are welcome to watch the meeting remotely and listen to the discussions taking place. It's also available on catch up afterwards. I'd like to welcome everyone here in Committee Room 1 at the Kensington Town Hall, and to everyone and anyone watching remotely. Before we proceed with the meeting, I just remind everyone, sort of simple housekeeping matters, make sure your mobile phones are on silent. And then we will start, as we always do, with 72 seconds silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. Thank you. Item 1 is apologies for absence. We've received apologies from Councillor Adam and from the Vice Chairman, Councillor Whedon Sands. Are there any other apologies? No. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Does any member have a declaration of interest? I have 2 declarations of interest. First one relates to the first substantive item, flood risk management strategy. I'm a director and co-founder of a environmental technology firm that works in flood prediction and prevention. So that is an interest. I've spoken to officers. I'm still going to chair that item, but I'll be careful not to make any comments that relate to my interest. The other interest is I'm a member of North Kensington Community Energy, which is relevant to the net zero, but it's a non-pecuniary interest, so I don't think it will affect my impartiality on that item. No other declarations? Right, the next item is minutes of the meeting held on 16th of October. Copies were circulated to members of the committee beforehand. Members happy for me to sign those minutes?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And that brings us on to the first substantive item, the local flood risk management strategy. We're joined by James Latham and Councillor Marley for this item. Thank you for joining us. Would you like to introduce the item?
I'll just say a very brief introduction and then hand to James. Firstly, also just to thank James for all the huge amount of work he's done dealing with the fallout from the 2021 floods in Kensington. I know a huge number of residents know your direct line very well, so and they've always been very pleased with everything you've been telling them. So just a thanks from me, and I'm sure from the committee as well. But we're obviously here tonight to discuss the strategy for the future. We are in London and indeed in Kensington, so we're a bit heavily reliant on very archaic infrastructure under our streets, things that have not been upgraded in a huge number of years. In a changing climate and with sort of much more flash flooding, we have to look at how we can not only mitigate those floods, but also deal with the water once it has landed and get it into the systems and get it away from the sources of population as quickly as possible. This strategy touches on lots of those elements from all sorts of interventions we are already making, the things that we might be able to do in the years ahead. But it also really focuses on the fact that we are only one part of a much wider piece. We have to work with our partners and really rely on them for the majority of the funding that's going to have to go into this area. The council, through its sort of work on Amazing Spaces, has already got a good program of improving drainage. But in the scheme of things, compared to the amount of floodwater we saw in 2021, I think the fact that always stays with me is you would have to build 8 Thames tideways to deal with the volume of water that landed that day. So the civil engineering requirement that we're dealing with here is absolutely vast. It goes well beyond the capacity of a local authority. It needs a London-wide and indeed national push to make sure that our cities are resilient, because the harm to people and the economic cost to insurance companies and to householders at large is absolutely staggering. So this is our piece of work in trying to address that, but James is definitely the person for the technical aspects contained within. So I don't know if you want to add a little bit as well, James.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just for a little bit of context about local flood risk management strategy. So it's a statutory document that the council has to hold and maintain. So our last one was 2015, and obviously a lot has happened since 2015, both in terms of infrastructure, built environment, but also significant flooding that impacted many residents and businesses in 2021. So we see this as both the culmination of the reviews, both kind of members of this select committee, but also other investigations into the flooding, and it sets the future direction of the council looking into the areas how we're going to manage the risk of flooding. It's important to understand that this is focusing on local flood risk that is mainly within the realms of what the council has responsibility for. But what it does, it provides those links to the other organisations, the other risk management authorities, who have responsibilities themselves in managing the risk of flooding. So the main focus is themed around four main areas. The first is about flood resilient communities. It's a focus on communities, focus on making sure that residents, businesses, infrastructure is ready for when flooding happens in the future. The second is around adapted places. As Councillor Marley said, we've got really good things going on. So it's reinforcing that and making it happen and delivering that alongside others, investing in infrastructure. The third is around working together, making sure that we work internally well together as a council, but also with other organisations, with members of communities that have been affected or are at risk of being affected. And the fourth thing is around monitoring and review, so making sure that we know what the future risks are as science evolves and updates, making sure that we're aware of those changes, and that we are looking at the actions that we set now, but making sure we keep on reviewing those as and when things change in the future. So the strategy is accompanied by an action plan. It's got a number of actions for various services within the council, individuals, as well as other organisations. And yeah, it provides that link from the council to the wider management of flood risk. I'm not going to go into too much more detail about the nuts and bolts, but I welcome any questions if you have or comments.
Thanks very much. And I just mentioned we welcome Councillor Jadot to the committee for this item, who was on the flood risk working group. So I'll start with Councillor Dorian, who chaired that working group.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bennett. Thank you, Councillor Marley and James, for the update. I was going through the action plan in some detail. I thought the first thing I'd do is just commend you on producing it's like a very thorough, very detailed action plan. You can see, I'm pleased to see you taking on board as well and get recommendations of our working group. I think it remains to be seen how much of this we can look realistically accomplish. I know the committee is going to be monitoring it as well over the next couple of years. But yes, everything I think we can realistically do is in there. There'll be lots of marginal gains. I think we try and do change improvements to highways and so on, small grant schemes as well. I think they will all help in total. But of course, as it's been alluded to, but the big things will be cooperation with Thames Water, with Pan London authorities as well. In terms of questions, the first one is, if you give an update on what's happening with the new Pan London group set up. Remember, tail end of our working group is about to come into being discussion. And the second point, I think I would re-emphasise, even though it's less within the council's remit, is insurance. And that's something that just came up again and again during our conversation. It is, in some sense, about the aftermath of flooding, but also, ironically, in preparation, because of course, after the aftermath of flooding, it's had a dramatic impact on the beings that people have to pay, whether or not they've been impacted by flooding. And we looked at that briefly towards the end of our working group, but in itself could have been an area of detailed investigation. Now, I know that our Member of Parliament, Felicity Buckins, has been looking at this in some detail, the flood relief scheme, which hasn't quite worked. Kensington, interesting details have come to light about that following the response from the flooding minister, which can be circulated as well. So I guess my second question, more request, rather, we need to support that as much as possible, evidence or whatever else we can do as a council to represent Kensington and Chelsea's specific needs.
So just answer this with me. On the Pan London, I sit as the lead councillor on the communication side of things. We have our next meeting either this Friday or next Friday. They had gone out to recruit a chair for the overall board. I'm hopeful that actually at this meeting I've told there is one now. Yeah, so James is nodding. So there is a bit of progress there. I think at least my element of it, the communication side, it is very important, but we need a proper Pan London way of articulating the issues, because I think it's very easy for every borough to go and have different messaging. We need a few key themes that actually everybody can use together. But I'd much rather probably been on the infrastructure side of it than on the communication side. But that's where we've got to. We've agreed a bit of the branding, a little bit of the language. This meeting will be following up on that one, so we'll have a little bit more for you by the end of this week or by the end of next. As for the insurance bit,
yeah. So also on the London strategy, so I sit on the officers group, and I also sit on the evidence working group. So that's discussing what evidence is needed across the whole of London to be able to make the steps, make kind of more positive strides, to help individual lead local flood authorities as well as combining across London. So in terms of the strategy that's coming out of that work, so WSP were appointed, so consultants has been appointed and has been working on developing the London-wide strategy that will fit kind of alongside these local strategies to span the aspects of work in managing the risk of flooding that can't be dealt with on an individual authority level. So work has progressed. The strategy is under development as well at the moment. So in terms of insurance, so you would have seen the letter that we received, the council received back from the flooding minister. It's a difficult picture in terms of what can be done to change most of the issues around the eligibility criteria for certain properties to be able to access flood free. It's we put detailed questions forward, and we as you said, like the MP for Kensington has also received not very positive moves towards a change in those. But we will continue to put forward the case for needing a review of those eligibility criteria for properties, particularly as it impacts Kensington, Chelsea, and other adjacent boroughs disproportionately to other authorities in the rest of London.
James, is that on the action?
So yeah, going forward about lobbying for insurance is on the action plan.
Okay.
Yeah, it's under the flood resilient communities, is as Councillor Dorian mentioned, we want residents, if flooding does impact their property, to be able to access the insurance that they need to be able to recover and not to have the ongoing mental health stress of not being able to get insurance, but also, having that safety net of insurance when.
Just because when I was looking through it, and I may well have missed it, and it sounds like I have. I noticed that pretty much all of the recommendations by the working group were addressed specifically in the action plan, but the insurance was the one area where it didn't seem like there was much. And I appreciate there is no solution right now for many of the issues, but I don't think we want to give up trying at this point. So if that's on the action plan to keep pursuing a solution, then I'm happy.
Yeah, so what we say in FRC 17 is continue to engage with and work alongside regional partners to ensure that residents and businesses in the borough can access affordable flood insurance. So it's but as well as making sure that we act together to
Councillor
in terms of the insurance and the existing property that had eligibility criteria with flood rate example. But is there something that we could do in terms of the increase in the premium because post-month flooding? I mean, that's something that I raised during the group because the increase is, but you're looking at factoring 10 times, in some insurance. Is there anything that we could press the government to sort of regulate that or decrease the increased cost?
I think it's very difficult.
No,
the relationship between local government and insurance. I know particularly at the moment as well that there are changes there are increases within the insurance market anyway that are impacting residents irrespective of the other factors. So it's important to take those considerations into account. But it's what we can do to amplify the concerns of residents.
Yeah, but I think that access. Yeah, I mean that came through Glasgow working group from everything I heard as a major issue. So when we get the update, probably in a year's time, even if we haven't come with a solution, arrived at a solution, a detailed update, and that would be good rather than just not really any progress made. Just to hear what's been done, that would be helpful. Thanks very much. Colleagues, other questions?
I have a small question.
Yes, Councillor Jelly.
You remember from our risk management working group, we did quite a lot talking about SaaS and green roofs and rain gardens, and one point was about the leaflets to be produced and available to everybody. Have we achieved anything like that?
So one thing we did over the summer is put more information available on the website. So we've updated the flooding page of the website with more information around flood protection measures that residents can do to their properties. Some additional information around sustainable drainage that they can make to their properties. But we acknowledge that that kind of more getting information into residents into residents' properties is really important to get the messages out there. There are awareness raising actions that relate to physical leaflets and physical material alongside other routes. So particularly the digitally excluded, it's important to get that information out there to residents who may be able to make changes but may not be easily be able to access the council's website or other information.
So those just quickly on that point, are those leaflets available at local libraries?
Some information has been produced, but the majority hasn't yet been developed. So
I think part of the Pan London work is also to have some unified language around all of these things. So it makes more sense to have generic messaging that works everywhere rather than very specific Kensington
Okay.
language that the
Yeah.
Each Council has to pick up.
Okay.
Not together, we had a very nice presentation in West London Bowling Club. One of our officers came, it was really wonderful. It was really straightforward, it was good presentation. And I think leaflet would follow because the leaflet which was given to us was basic, quite knowledgeable, I mean, quite informative. So to reproduce something like that and put in a few local like this would be quite inspiring for some residents. I just want to ask you for page 44, so 44. You see, there's this map which shows that Dalgona, obviously, I am keen on my residential well-being. You see, this is little scraps here, and it's a Countess Creek, right? And I am still puzzled why we as a council don't pick trees according to London clay and according to the flooded area. We just put the weeping willows. What about those who really help with the flooding? And you see, all this year passed, and I've seen nothing really happening in this area here. And it's a clay. And proposal was to remove topsoil and even expose London clay even more. It's absolutely absurd. So you see, the question is now, how well you put this into action? Because we've been here last year, right? Residents came here, and I see nothing in Dalton. I see a little bit of Barberry green garden, you put it there. You put something in St. Helens, but it's nothing on the level of Queen's Caroline sites. So you put green rain garden, right? But it's not as such like you have in Holland Park. So what I want to know, how do you distribute the funding you mentioned here? It's quite impressive. Because you said here that you will analyze which area it's in most need. So I understand which area it's not flooded, right? But can be flooded from the raining water. But if it's North Kensington and it's sewer overflowing, it floods anyway. So if I have a Countess Creek, why would you not really help with that? When you know already it's a problem, so planting proper trees, making more greenery, helping Barberry Primary School to have a living wall, a green wall, so really help a lot. Nothing has been done so far as I see, and it's 1 year after flooding. So I don't know what's the point to produce the strategy when you are not implementing a simple leaflet, which is a basic.
Okay, quite a lot in there. As for the schemes that have already been implemented, there's obviously been a timeline in getting them into the ground. So the one in St. Helens, for instance, started probably even before 2021. So there are a number of projects coming down the line which have SUDS as part of it. I think SUDS as a solution are reasonable, but they are very, very small compared to the amount of land surface area that we're trying to mitigate against. So a few planters on a highway project is not really going to make a material difference to flooding. It will help it around the edges, and lots of little interventions make a whole, but I don't think putting a little bit in Dalgona is going to make a huge amount of difference right now. As for the tree planting and the species that we use, personally, I don't have knowledge of trees, so I would be deferring to the arboricultural team as to what goes best where. I don't know if that's been debated at all amongst officers, change our tree types.
I mean, it does come up when tree species are being chosen, the suitability of them. But I mean, on Little Worm and Scrubs, there's a specific action, AP5, around Little Worm and Scrubs. So working closely between myself and others within parks to make sure that work planned within Little Worm and Scrubs can help towards slowing the flow of water from that area. So specifically around there, we've got actions in Little Worm and Scrubs, as well as in housing estates. We don't specifically list out in the strategy exactly what order we're going to deliver in housing estates. It's something that will probably need to be reviewed, but where opportunities come up and when it's allocated around other.
There's also the opportunity for sort of Ensil and city living. I know Councillor Palatitas and Councillor Oretti have approved a scheme on Napier Road that has a number of trees with more planting involved there, and even though that's taken a number of months or maybe even a year to get there, it's now coming into being. So individual councillors can spur that activity on through their own pots as well.
I just have a question going back to the comms, the sort of information comms side of it. Perhaps in 3 or 6 months' time, once we've got a more detailed comms plan, once it's figured out between the London London Wide Group and ourselves, could we have a written update to committee on what the comms plan is?
Yeah.
I think to using libraries, potentially offering presentations to local groups. Be good to see all that in.
Yes. Yeah.
That would be really good to see. Yes, councillor Vance.
Also kind of in that area. What is being done so residents know and are aware of possible funding? So obviously we have all these things, but how easy are they to actually sort of research, find and apply for residents that might be to go along with everything that you guys suggested? That's the next step.
Well, my first thought would be whatever material does come out of this working group, we could put a small emphasis on additional things that KNC is doing above and beyond. Obviously those pots are pretty unique. Whilst Ensign's obviously a bit broader, but City Living is something that we have. But you know, given well, it sounds like we now have a chair, but given we haven't had one for a while, we haven't been motoring, at least on the public side of the Pan London Group. I'm sure officers have been working feverishly behind the scenes, but certainly I spent, I think the last meetings have been debating the strap line that was going to go with the work rather than actually any of the meat on, you know, the substantive meat. So.
But once that's, I suppose if once the London Wide Group is sort of up and running and there's proper terms of reference, it'd be another good thing to be updated on. And to Laura's point, because I think the report mentioned there's a few pots of money that are open to community organisations. It's probably part of the comms plan, just having those all in one place, but to be able to.
Yeah, and some of those come up kind of annually, things that can be accessed by the Greater London Authority or things like that. And yeah, they can be shared as
yeah. So it'd be good to have that sort of all on our website, not just our own funds, but if there are other funds, mail or whatever else, just have it all in one place. Sure, really good. Yeah. Yes, Councillor Nunn.
Thank you, Chair. On delivering the strategy on page 52, class releases for communities. And we know the action point, which is on page 79. Support the delivery of community resiliency workshops and associated events with local organizations. 3 events per year. I mean, how feasible is that in terms of people being aware is going to take place? I mean, how do we advertise? Where do we find that information?
Yeah, so the community resilience workshops mentioned in the action plan. They're hosted by the resilience team in council, and don't just focus on flood resilience. It's on wider community resilience. So a really successful one was held in May over 2 days, and included other emergency responses as well as flood risk management. I know conversations are ongoing in terms of the follow-on activities, but you know, the anticipation is that those resilience workshops will happen, and we want flooding to be part of that, so that, you know, if community representatives come not necessarily having flooded themselves, they may get a wider awareness of it.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Darren.
Quite a lot of the action plan seems to hinge on the availability of this excellent gentleman. In terms of resourcing, is that sufficient? Make sure there's time to look at all these proposals.
I would add, I think that's a very good point. I just want to add to that. One thing in what is a very detailed and comprehensive action plan that isn't there is sort of estimated costings. And maybe that's too difficult to do, but if you could address that as well.
I think firstly, I think you're right. Even the suds planting ends up full of litter. It needs to be litter picked. It needs to be maintained. It needs to have the right plants there. It needs to look good as well, because otherwise it's just a pile of earth. There's a cost to all of these things, and already we're seeing in doing some of these projects coming down the line just how difficult it is to get trees into the roads that we're converting or improving, and it is a mammoth task. I mean, I think I've gone into to bat a number of times where a tree has been felled on Holland Park Avenue, trees that were planted before the advent of electricity, and yet we cannot replace that tree because there's now electricity cables underneath the tree roots. So, you know, taken to its absolute sort of ludicrous conclusion, that means eventually there'll be no trees left because there's always going to be some sort of utility underneath them. But there is a cost attached to it. As for a holistic cost of all of this work, I think it would be very difficult to put together a large number of sort of, you know, through the planning processes where we're able to extract value, perhaps at the expense of other opportunities. So where we push for them to deliver public realm schemes, some flood mitigation, they may not then be paying towards some other project that the council may want to do. So be very hard to see just exactly how much money does generate from all of that. I don't know if you've done a bit of a calculation on it, but I certainly don't have an overarching number for all of these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult because many of the actions aren't capital works or things you can necessarily associate a specific amount to. I mean, on your point about it just being essentially, I think the really, really important thing that hopefully comes out is the fact that many different teams within different services and individuals within different services in the council are doing works that are contributing towards the risk of managing the risk of flooding. It's just about coordinating and making sure that happens.
That's itself, isn't it?
Yeah, yes. So then you know, there are only some things that fall entirely with the lead local flood authority role, particularly around planning applications coming forward and those kind of things. So, you know, supporting teams within housing, delivering amazing landscape schemes, or it doesn't take a considerable amount of time from a flooding perspective, but actually it's delivered by other services. So it's just about the efficiencies in doing that rather than a separate team doing everything to do with, or trying to do everything to do with flooding.
Because I suppose it's difficult because with our aims, sort of having flood, so we've got net zero coming on later, and we said we've put, it's a little bit ballpark, but we put a cost against what we think it'll take to achieve net zero. But with sort of having flood resilient communities, at the moment we don't have a cost against that, and I appreciate that's incredibly difficult to do. But do you think over the next year, maybe ahead of the update in a year's time, elements of it at least could be costed, so we have?
I'm sure elements could be. I mean, I suppose it's, are we able with infinite money to stop all flooding ever? I think perhaps, but it's not. It's, even if we can mitigate it, say half the number of homes that are flooded in the next large event, is that considered a success, or is that still a failure of the overall strategy? I mean, I think it is incremental improvements from here until a proper solution is found. Again, that sort of tideway number, you know, that was billions of pounds, and you need 8 of them. So
Yeah,
that's a lot. That's a
I
lot.
suppose, yeah, that's an example where I guess they couldn't cost the whole endeavour of preventing flooding, but you have a particular project which you can put the cost against.
We have those started costing the revenue implications of some of the schemes that we've put in. So NSIL schemes where people have paid for planters. Historically, we haven't been very good at working out what that lifespan total cost actually is for the council at large. It's very nice for the ward to have a planter, but they then sort of allow the rest of the council to pick up the tab to maintain it. So they're very small, obviously, initially, but if you keep doing lots and lots of these things, there is an ongoing revenue cost but beyond just the capital. But I think it's a good challenge that we should probably at least be able to put some numbers beside some of these things. Yeah.
Great. And the other thing that sort of goes alongside that is impact or sort of prioritization. So if in a year's time we have an update, you know, okay, maybe 80% of them we're proceeding with and a sort of green traffic light, and 20% have stalled. Unless we know the impact, we can sort of kind of guess or figure out from a lot of them what the impact is, but is the highest impact ones, are they in the 20% or the 80%? You know, that makes a big difference. So I guess do you think it would benefit from some level of prioritization of the action plan, or sort of high, medium, low impact or something like that?
Yeah, that could be done, and we try to. It's a bit confusing because some of the actions are ongoing actions.
Yeah,
And some of them
yeah,
are,
yeah.
have specific time.
Mm.
But what we try to do is the ones to be delivered in the first 2 years of the strategy were identified,
As
but
that.
some, but yeah, at a high,
Mm.
but some were in years 3 or 4 or later on. If
Okay.
they're low priority. But
Yeah.
but definitely in terms of reviews, and it could be in terms of for the final version of the strategy, it might be something worth including if it fits to say which potentially which of the even which of the ongoing actions are higher weighted than others and more important.
Yeah.
So on.
I think that would help.
I have
Thank
a
you.
question, it just popped to my head now, if I can. I am very curious about the way you release funding into the SADs and local projects on council owners day, because since we own the council property, social houses, and some of them have a beautiful space, but I want to see how do you actually release money? Is it initiative from the residents and later they go and apply for green fund? Or is it you assessing and as a skilled, experienced, actually you see what can be done about? I just want to understand how do you actually implement what you say? Are you waiting for them to come forward? Actually go to the states, assess them, and actually you do something quickly? Because you are planning to do Portobello Road. I don't know why waiting so long.
Big road.
Yes, true.
Mm.
No rubbish things down there. So I just want to understand the how you actually put this money into action. And is it you as the council who initiates all these projects? Or do you wait for residents to come forward with instead of different ideas?
So on the highways works, there was a council commitment to do one scheme in every ward. So we'll be working our way around the borough. They're really coming forward as and when people have good ideas. So one in Earls Court came forward because a resident had a public speaking question. Portobello Road obviously was a scene of a large amount of flooding that happened in 2021. And again, is somewhere where we think we can make improvements to the flood resilience there. On housing estates, it's probably more a question for my colleague, Sof McVeigh, but I am aware that each estate does have a housing improvements fund, which they can access to do projects on the estate itself. But there is still the ongoing sort of maintenance of all of those projects that has to be picked up by the HRA. I don't know, you probably know more.
Yeah, so on our estates there is the estates improvement budget. I think that's nominated by resident associations within the estates themselves on how they would wish that budget to be spent. Other funding sources will have different routes through to approvals. So things like NSIL has a separate through to the council that officers can't just nominate schemes and locations necessarily. So it really helps to have residents and resident associations coming forward with proposals in areas so that they can be looked at.
So I suppose we're largely relying on sort of residents and community groups come forward with ideas, but also there's the element of when we're doing a scheme for a highway scheme, in any case, we'll always look at it, the SAD's impact.
Can I just conclude?
No,
Last
no.
time I was, last question. I tried to really put across that we own council own estates, but land around, let's say, Traverton Rains, it's just literally impressive. Not in Barn Estate, again, St. Quintin's cottages, you have a long strip of land completely wasting and wearing bare. And you say that this residence improvement fund is supposed to know, we tried, it's not enough. So the question is, they have, yes, I don't deny that. But this is not enough to do the red green roof on 2 garages. They pay, it's impossible. So where's the money coming? Because you got a fund and I want to see how you put it into action. Now you're telling me there are money here, we're waiting for residents, and actually they have money so they do it themselves.
Is that NSIL wasn't enough for that particular fund?
No, it's Insel money. It's just so many
Okay.
projects you cannot cover, but it's
Okay.
impossible.
So other estates have used the council's used other external funds. So Thames Water had a fund, the Environment Agency has funding that we can access on areas. But for instance, we've got Alum and Barnum Estate, and the residents themselves requested sites as part of landscaping works. On the back of that, we've developed funding applications to Thames Water to access additional external funding to be able to deliver a large scheme that would be able to be delivered. And that's why we have the action of a continuing program of delivery through our housing management service to make sure that we can deliver. We're not going to be able to do every housing estate all at once, and it's about that. It's about where there are opportunities and identifying those so they can be implemented.
But the housing management teams are sort of up to date with the funds available that they can.
Yes, yeah. Oh yeah, no, they're fully supported with in terms of providing information and being able to get funding.
Interesting. Colleagues, any other questions? No. Well, I think that's a very good item to go through. A huge amount of work's obviously been done, and thank you, James, for that. Not just for the report itself, but for all your support to the flood risk management working group as well. And we know it's something that impacts residents to, in some cases, quite an extreme degree. So just to summarise that item, so I think we're looking forward to updates when the London-wide working group is sort of properly formalised with terms of reference. In when the update comes back in a year's time, we look forward to particular sort of details on any progress on the insurance side of things and those recommendations. When there's a sort of full comms plan in place, which might include flood resilience working groups, leafleting, etc., a written update on that would be fantastic. And then we also talked a little bit about sort of level of resourcing and costing and the impact of items, and that sort of some feedback really from the committee is something which should be considered in the final report. But other than that, just thank you very much for a great piece of work.
Thank you.
Right. So the next item is a net zero responses to the recommendations from the net zero working group. And I think Councillor Pascal will join us for the committee for that one. Yeah. Well, thank you all very much for this update on what is another sort of really covering some really, I think, important issues for residents tonight, and net zero is another one. Would you like to introduce the report?
I think to a large extent it speaks for itself. As you say, net zero is a major priority, but also a major challenge for the council. I think over the past 12 months, there's things like inflation and interest rates have gone up, our ability to borrow and therefore to invest in net zero has become more strained. That shouldn't dim our ambition, but it is something we need to be mindful of. I think the paper sets out pretty well where we're making progress. So, for example, we've made progress on some of our schools and operational buildings. I know that we still want to green our fleet. I think waste is another component in terms of what contributes to those carbon emissions. And we need to ramp up our efforts to try and hit some of our targets. But there are enormous challenges, and I think the help of scrutiny and the input from councillors on this committee has been very helpful in that, because we need all of our best minds on the problem, because there's no time like today to be bringing down our carbon footprint.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Pascal. I'll let you lead off.
Thank you very much. First, to declare an interest in science, that I'm a governor of 2 schools, which potentially, well, this live in a house and that's a property which might be part of my parents. And I've been working in this area for probably longer than most of you been living. So with that, could I ask the first question, which is when will phase one schools programme be completed on site, and will it be in line with the school year? Because schools can't close and open in the school year; they have to break from September.
Yeah, but we did a bit of that a week or so ago. So Terry and I were both there. We went to Avondale and some parts of Assisi. The work that's happening seems like it's progressing really well. I was impressed by the work that was being done there. I was told that the works on phase one should be done in the spring, so kind of March, April. And that would be great. That would be sooner than the end of the school year. Hopefully it would mean that we can progress quite quickly with phase two.
So all the schoolwork phase one should be completed by the end of this financial year.
Yeah.
And work's well underway on every school apart from Colville, which has got a listed building. So we just need to go to the planning permission for that. But most of the schools now, they've got the heat networks, so they've got the heat pumps in, they've replaced the radiators, they've done a lot of the work, so they're on track. And we work really closely with the schools to limit disruption, because that's the main point. So a lot of the work is done between 4 in the evening and 10 in the evening, so it doesn't interfere with schools. But the feedback we've had from schools has been super positive. They've really said that contractors leave the school spotless, so the teachers can go straight in the mornings and stuff like that. So that side of things, which I thought was going to be a really big issue, hasn't, touch wood, been a big issue.
So following up on that, could we perhaps agree as a committee, although I'm not speaking those terms, recommendation to the leadership team to agree bringing forward investment to retrofit the remaining council schools, council-owned schools, that's excluding the fence schools, much as we would like them, we don't have direct responsibility for. So would that be something that we could recommend?
Should we hear the lead member and
I would
direct opinion?
No, I would welcome that recommendation. I would love for us to be in a place where we have retrofitted all of our council-owned schools. I see that as an achievable and meaningful progress towards our net zero commitment. Schools are 9% of our carbon emissions as a council. And the council-owned school component of that is a big part of that. They're buildings that we own, and they're emitting carbon at the moment. And if we're serious about net zero, we should be trying to bring that down. So I think that's a very sensible recommendation.
Colleagues, happy with that recommendation?
What's the timeline? Is that, are we waiting for the agreed net zero?
Yeah, that will be before the 2030 target. Definitely.
Yeah, in terms of where we are, we're underway, as we say, on phase one, and hope to be done pretty quickly with that. There were 6 schools in phase one. We have submitted a match funding application with the PSDS, which is government funding, for what will be phase 2, which covers 8 schools. Thereafter, there would be 6 remaining council-owned schools, and I think Councillor Pascal lights on a very important issue here.
Are we prioritising schools which have particularly poor insulation? So the class is in my patch of Bousfield, which is very poor insulation. That's in phase.
Yeah.
So we went through all the schools, looked at their heating, their energy use, additional works, because it's important to do the fabric first type approach. So phase one, there's a lot of temporary heating systems, so a lot were kind of around the Grenfell and Nossendale area, which are impacted either by flooding. Avondale or St Francis was a temporary boiler as well. So we really prioritised those first of all, and then we looked at highest emitters and kind of age of the heating systems.
Okay. So just to check with Councillor Pascal's recommendation, by bringing it forward, what are we specifically requiring?
So subject to phase 2 funding being secured from government, then it's an additional capital bid for the remaining schools.
Yeah, happy with that. Yes, Councillor.
Yeah, I've got a question on that. I know, imagine you've secured the funding from the government, you factored budget. Obviously, the world is not in peace right now, and you could have wars and other coronavirus or etc. If there's an inflation and the budget that you factored in, for some reason, whether it's the material or the supply increases out of your budget, to be, I don't know, in terms of timeline, would you be happy to extend that, or would you be, is there a coming? I just want that flexibility around, because we don't have to push in just because.
Yeah, well, the net zero commitment we've made is 2030. We're trying our best to meet that, although I've outlined there are challenges. In terms of the schools commitment, I think given where we are in the programme already, which is that we're underway on 6, there are 8 more to come in phase 2, which could be done in the next couple of years, subject to that funding. It probably is realistic that we could meet that by 2030, even accounting for those inflationary pressures. But you're right, if costs go up, we would need to either dip into contingency, there would normally be contingency in capital bids, or we'd need to identify new monies that could help us meet that. If we didn't, obviously, you're right, there's a risk that the progress can stall.
I would like to add that point.
Yeah.
Not to have pressure on the time, but, based on the.
We'll probably build in sufficient contingency to account for knowable inflationary pressures.
I think that's sensible, but certainly the point Councillor Pascal made in the original recommendation which was very sensible, was around prioritising insulation, because when it comes to net zero, you've got the double benefit of keeping people warm as well as moving towards our net zero targets, and that made a lot of sense with housing, and that's with schools as well. So I think we're very happy to make that recommendation laid out by Councillor Pascal to bring forward the phase 2 subject funding being achieved in the government. Yeah,
thank you. One detail which I want to ask is, would it be possible to present in future updates the total number of units out of 9,000 that are either EPC B or C? I know the limitations on those measurements, but it's just that in the way this has been reported, there are a whole certain number of different schemes, and to get an idea out of the 9,000 how many have been reached, and also the total million tons of carbon for housing, social housing energy use, because it's been titrated at 25 megatons, and it's a question of how far it goes each year because of the profile of implementation. The main point I wanted to ask about, though, is I noted the positive response to the recommendations we made in 2022. In particular, grant funding and HRA review, I think is dramatic, because there's been the movement that we threw 100 million elephant into the pool, and everybody shouted this bad way that we can't afford it. I mean, back in the opposite direction. But if I read this report correctly, out of the 100 million pounds, after 33% of the time in the report, 36% of the time in the report, we've actually got 40 million in terms of grant funding agreed. So if that's the case, the pace of grant funding obtaining is up to scratch. However, the implementation is perhaps not, but that's naturally going to follow. Now, and there's also very welcome draft guidance on double glazing. Yeah. But I wanted to apologise. Like the recommendation 4, we obviously didn't make clear. Certainly thinking about it with Terry before the meeting, he definitely didn't understand what we meant. And it's our fault because we should have said it clear. When we were doing the working group, we challenged Tara who was Lisa Taylor's predecessor as Director of Finance, how to financially manage the progress from carbon net zero in 2030 through to carbon zero. And she came up with basically an internal council governance procedure that set aside an annual provision, each carbon zero unit from 2030, hypothecated to upgrading to carbon zero. And the concept that she came up with, she looked at all sorts of offsetting schemes, risks of forests in South America through to other schemes. She basically came up with this concept that avoided legal, financial, and governance risk of traditional offsetting. And it placed annual provision rate and the carbon zero target date for completing the job firmly in the policy making area of the leadership team and allowed for grant contribution as well. And I personally think that it was so simple and so brilliant that maybe it's difficult to articulate it. And I would like, therefore, to ask if we can agree that we should applaud Taryn, but also more importantly, perhaps ask Lisa and the director of Cleaner Greener and housing officers to work up a detailed paper on the practicalities of implementing this supposedly simple idea, because I've no doubt when we come down to it, it's actually more complex than this hypothesis. So I think it's a question both to officers here and also to us as to whether we can agree that.
But I think so. It's sort of really clarifying what was in the original recommendations and then bringing sort of moving forward a step on that. Are we happy first that there's full understanding on that recommendation now?
There is, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's fine. I'm more than happy to pick up with our finance colleagues as well.
Yeah.
I suppose what we've been trying to do previously is just try to reduce emissions, and that's that's been our aim. But I
But
understand.
I keep coming back to the fact that as much as everyone agreed with 2030, if we ain't got money, we ain't got the money, we ain't got money.
Yeah.
And so I went and asked the money person and said, well, how do we do it?
Yeah, and it's a timely conversation.
Yeah.
That one's
And it's a nice idea because, I mean, to be ridiculous, if you put £1 for every unit and none of them are conform, I know some do, it would be £9,000 a year total. So, I mean, Johnny could do that out of a exactly. But if we put £100,000 per unit, it would be ridiculous the other way as well. So the political judgment and the commercial judgment and the technical implementation judgment have to go into the detail of where it should be placed. And it would be an annual contribution by the council, not by the tenant or the resident. Annual to hypothecate that money into it to be used to facilitate carbon.
So that's starting in 2030.
Starting in 2030, because up till then we've got
All right. I think
still have us to achieve our target.
Yeah. So I think unless anyone disagrees, the committee is happy to recommend that being brought forward. There's no rush because it starts in 2030. So maybe at the next update on sort of net zero feedback, or earlier if it's available, but at the next update to incorporate that, in, that would be great.
Thanks.
Yes,
Going back to Councillor Pascal's
Yeah.
first point around the positive need around grant funding. It is James from Housing has done a fantastic job, but I suppose that 100 million, we've got to be aware that that was very high level indicative costing, and that's likely to go up significantly as well. So that rate of progress is, we can't judge it against the 100 million target. That's all I'm saying.
but that was the need for the estimate about 2 or 3 years ago. So it's
precisely. Yeah. So the more detailed work you do, the inflation and everything we've had, that cost is going up significantly. So the 40 million is brilliant, but it's certainly not 40% of the funding you need.
But what I will say is I witnessed 2 schemes down by King's Road, which actually were being implemented at the same time under the policy regime that we have at the moment. Because the first scheme was tendered for 5 years ago and been delayed on the programme, and the second scheme had been tendered the year before. The net result of the amount of carbon reduction work being done completely different, and because something like 20% of the cost of a job is setting and scaffolding up, the loos and all the rest of it. So if you're doing it when you're doing a job anyway, adding another bit of insulation is not necessarily very expensive. You only get that chance once every 30 years. You can't do it every time.
Colleagues, questions on this report? I have a couple more.
I had a
Yes,
question for Councillor Starch.
Is that allowed?
It is your report.
Go ahead.
I was wondering if you could sort of maybe talk a bit more about your recommendation too on these.
Yes, the reason why we suggested a delay on heat pumps was not because we were against them, but because of the state of development at that time. And it's not just the heat pumps, but it's also having the right people to install them, so that the labour wasn't available at that time. And also because the maintenance regimes, maintenance guys, how often you're going to have to maintain. I mean, air conditioner, which is probably the nearest technical device to heat pumps, it is notorious for having a big maintenance tail attached to a relatively straightforward capital cost. And the other issues to do with noise and so on. I mean, in Earl's Court, you're aware of fan noise from Bristol as well. Every house has a fan outside as well. There were a whole number of issues, and government was making big noises about supporting the industry to develop heat pumps and so on. We thought that it was an industry that was coming but wasn't mature yet. Therefore, we didn't have a view as to how long we should fabric first, and then if you couldn't afford anything else, do the heat pumps maybe a little bit down the line. Now, it's probably part of it. You know, one of the things that the government has done recently is to take the pressure off some of the implementation issues in the short term, both in cars and the buildings and so on. We thought it was vital not to slow up on fabric. If you had to do the heat pumps, do them in line with when you're going to do boiler replacements rather than actually throwing mobile boilers, etc. So there were a whole series of things that if we couldn't afford the whole package, at least do the bit that is essential, because certainly, I mean, people talk about it in North Kensington. It's certainly my understanding. We have a lot of residents who are only as warm as the building they live in. They can't afford fuel anyway. And that was another factor.
And there's also trials going on in sort of introducing hydrogen into the gas network, and we don't know where that's going to lead. So I suppose the point with that recommendation is not a recommendation in perpetuity. It's a point in time and something to always reflect on. Sort of
Is that prioritisation?
Yeah.
Isn't it?
And then we did put in the full report, so it wasn't mentioned here, that we certainly favoured pilots being done, and pilots had been carried out in the environment.
James seems on fantastic work.
I just want to start with a recommendation. You know, we've seen news cases across social media that a lot of complaints on heat pumps in the existing installation, which were not great. I think
Where
that
they're
more
put
people
in for
involved, yeah,
insulation. Yeah.
It's not, it wasn't official not doing it, but it's
yes, no, I agree.
cautious until.
Don't rush ahead. Yeah. Councillor Burns.
Thanks, Chair. I have just two questions. One is about street lighting. We've got 60% remaining. How long will that take to implement, and how easy are they to replace? And then my other question is on the fleets of, like, you know, trying cars. And apparently they kind of wear and tear. How long does it take for them to stop working?
The street lights is kind of as quick as we can bring in forward, isn't it?
Yeah, so street like
There's a cost to that, and it depends how much money we bring forward at what time. And obviously, in a sense, competes with other greening priorities. So things like building works and the retrofit programs that we were talking about. They're kind of all fishing in the same pond to an extent.
Okay.
And so we're trying to do it as quickly as we can. But the challenge is that, for example, if you take something like the Green Fund, which is a significant source of kind of consistent capital funding available to the net zero team, it's only £1 million a year. And if you were to use it on a single retrofit project, that would probably absorb it for that 12 months. Meanwhile, if you were to put 150 grand in for 340 grand, which I think is I can see here at 7.13, then obviously you couldn't do those heat pumps or those solar panels, and so there are trade-offs. In terms of the fleet, you may hear their lifespan, but
depends on the vehicle.
So the bigger ones, so I guess the waste collection, they seem to you buy those, right?
Yeah.
Some of them you lease and some we buy. So the
the waste fleet at the moment is mostly diesel. And then we are looking at transitioning to an electric fleet. There is issues at the moment. The depot that we actually have, in residential and fire risks associated with kind of big electric batteries. So we're exploring that, but we are looking to hopefully transition to an electric fleet in the next 2 years, if we can. In terms of lifespan, it's a really good question. It's hasn't been totally tested, you know, and say so. A normal diesel vehicle kind of lasts 8 years, and we're anticipating that's at least 8 years, if not more. And then it might just be the battery that needs replacing rather than the whole vehicle itself. So, but they use every day the vehicle, so they get a huge amount of wear and tear. Just quickly going back on the street lighting, the capital programme is increasing on that, so we are accelerating the number of new street lighting, street lamps going in. Because again, there is an energy saving associated with that, so it's kind of an investor save type proposal.
If a diesel, just follow up on that, if a diesel waste collection truck dies tomorrow, what are we replacing it with at the moment? Another diesel one?
Not sure it won't. Exactly. Yeah, it would be.
Okay.
Yeah, we're looking at putting in the charging infrastructure at Pembroke Road if we can, to allow the charging to take place for those electric vehicles. So we've just got to iron out a few issues, but that's certainly the intention, is to have electric vehicles moving forward from.
So when
26.
I think it would be great to have an update on that plan when it's ready. When's a reasonable time frame to?
It was 2 years, but with depot issues at the moment, it
Just not to start buying them, but to get the plan, to have a look at the plan.
Yeah, no, we can get you the plan. There's just quite a lot of unknowns.
Yeah,
at the moment.
That would
But
be
the
great.
original intention was to start renewing that fleet, because it's phased the way that we do it. So I think it's 18 vehicles where we were going to replace for electric.
Yeah.
And that was kind of fine for 2026, I think it was,
Okay.
and then start phasing out from there.
Because it's obviously another one that has, like insulation, that has other negative externalities in terms of air quality.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it'd be really good to see that plan.
Okay.
Colleagues, other questions? So I had one on, in terms of calculating net zero, it's a broader question. Do we factor in all the things that we own that get rid of carbon? Mostly trees. Like Holland Park must be quite a carbon sink. Do we factor that into net zero?
We don't at the moment. We just do emissions. We don't do sinks.
I think it would be interesting if it's going to cost, £2 million to assess how much carbon we're sucking up.
Yeah.
Let's not do that. But if it's quite cheap and easy to do, at least it's sort of roughly, it'd be good to know, because that would sort of help us towards net zero. And I don't think it's cheating. It's real. The part's there and people use it.
Can I be certain? Sorry,
Certainly
certainly in terms of housing, where we're looking to install green roofs or buy solar roofs, we look at the carbon sequestration involved there. So I think it's like every square metre is a kilogram of carbon per year. Not much, but it all adds up.
Yeah, it does, absolutely. And I think just to do a sort of assessment of our parks and trees and what impact they have.
I think we do have to report for tree. We had a program or platform called iTrees, where it did look at carbon uptake throughout the year, so we could look at that.
Yeah, good. Yes.
Just to say that one of the things we established out of scope of our study was that carbon which is released as a result of activities in KNC, which by the council in the 2020 case, which are outside council. So we did not include the manufacturing carbon of vehicles, nor of tables and chairs, or whatever, pens, paper and so on. So if one's going to go into more detail about parks, one would need perhaps to include that scope as well. And my hunch from the Ether report is they're roughly even. The focus for our say this, first of all, find out what our direct was. 90% building, 50% council housing, large proportion of schools and our own buildings, and only 10% roughly is all the other things which were in the air quality and climate change plan prior to the Ether report. It was a big shock and a big change.
Buildings are the big.
Yes. Okay. Colleagues, other questions on that? Just going back to talking about buildings and going back to the point of EPC ratings, of the sort of 9,000 homes we've identified, do we have do we know how many of those have a EPC rating of less than C?
Yeah, the vast majority, but if you were to ask me, probably about 2/3, provide the full breakdown.
Yeah.
Just on EPC data, it's fair to say at the moment, it's projected, so we've got based on samples. So one of the bits of work we're doing as part of the surveys for the wider housing capital works programme is making sure we're filling those gaps and updating them. Also, there's different sources of EPC data as well, so you can get a swing of about 9 points, which moves you from a B to a C or a C to a D.
Yeah.
So there's a huge bit of work we've been doing to reconcile all of that in the last couple of years. So we've got a much better understanding of our stocks.
More accurate data.
Now, mean would be, or median would be a D, I would say, this far.
Okay. And presumably we are, wherever possible, trying to prioritise the ones with the lowest ratings.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to do well. Yes. Yeah.
There are some flaws with the EPC actual system as well, but I think it's one of the only measures I suppose we have, isn't it? We can use. But
Yeah, so we're starting to, so the main thing is it's focused understandably from what was brought in on costs, and obviously at the moment that means that a gas combi boiler is seen as something which is good in terms of cost, which it is, not in terms of carbon, it absolutely isn't. So the sort of more sophisticated way of measuring building performance is using the passive house planning package and measuring heat demand, which is very much what it sounds like. Lower the heat demand, the more energy efficient your home. So in terms of taking that fabric first approach, we're setting metrics to try and measure the before and after of the works that we're doing to reduce that heat demand, which benefits from a carbon emission point of view, also reduces bills in that you need less input to keep your home going.
Exactly. That's great. And then the other question I had was, we see sort of key decisions come up of accepting funding for various programmes, particularly for housing. Have we ever had to turn down any funding?
not that I'm aware of.
No, I'm not aware of that. I mean, the one thing I would say is there is a triangulation around the terms of accepting grant in terms of the windows of delivery tend to be quite quick. I might go as far as say sometimes somewhat unrealistic, but that's something the sector as a whole has experienced and been feeding back. And we've got a relationship from a housing point of view, about 7 different grant funders. And to be fair, I think one of the things which Kensington and Chelsea's done really well is feeding back the lessons that we have learned. I think because of the Silent Valley Capital Programme and various other things unique to hear, certainly in terms of Grenfell context, is we've ended up finding ourselves at the leading edge of some of this work, as Councillor Pascal was saying, in terms of the leadership and challenge set down by this committee, and also in terms of residents are keen to see us progress. So one thing I did want to mention, which is relatively hot off the press, is by the end of 21-22, we'd actually reduced our carbon emissions in housing management by 18%. Based on the 2019 baseline. So sometimes, not least in terms of cost, it could feel a bit like eating an elephant, but we are starting to build momentum, which others are noticing.
No, and I think there's something in the report saying the reductions we've made since 2008. I can't remember what the number, but it was more than 50%.
52%.
Yeah.
Can we just wait for the final figures?
Yeah.
Just one caveat on that. Is that the calculations that were made prior to the ESA report made without building.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's 50-something% of 10%.
Okay.
51% of
10%. Fair point. I think in terms of updates, it would be really good to get, or at least recommend to the committee itself to continue to get an annual update on net zero progress. Be up to the future chairman to determine that for certain. But I think if we set that expectation, that would be a sensible thing to do, because we don't want to take our eye off the ball, which I'm sure we won't. Any other questions? No? Well, sorry, Terry.
Just make one comment as well. Just linking back into the flooding conversation earlier. There's also there's going to be some greater focus as well on climate adaptation as well. So it's how climate change impacts residents and the local area, which does pick up flooding. So it's linking into the work that James is doing as well. So we're looking at that across the whole council. That does bring extra resources into that kind of flooding discussion as well, and dealing with lead net pan-London approach to that as well.
Yeah.
So that's a real big focus at the moment across the whole of London, is the impact of climate change, as well as trying to be net zero. It's the adaptation side.
That makes complete sense. Right, so I'll just to recap quickly before we move on. We discussed and recommended bringing forward the schools programme, those for the schools programme, subject to funding. The hypothecated offsetting costs. So again, there's no huge rush, but we can look into a sort of summary or proposal on that. When you've got an update of the plans for electrifying the waste fleet, it'd be good to see those. It's a recommendation just to at least have a look at the level of carbon sequestration in the borough and the sort of rough estimates around that, including all our parks. And then we sort of recommended to you and to the future committee to set the expectation for annual updates. That's it. Yes.
One thing interesting is just about report writing. That if we could have the number of housing units that at any one time are up to EPCB and EPCC.
Yeah.
Because at the moment that would be fantastic.
Yeah,
Even if it's an estimate for the matter.
Yeah. If you circulate that and that's ready, that would be great. Thanks. First of all, thank you very much. Another report with a huge amount of work's been done and we really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
You're on stage for a budget.
Yes.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so we now move to item A6, the environmental services budget proposals. Yes.
Could I say a few words just
Go ahead.
well, we'll start is that thank you for inviting me. Budget scrutiny, as outlined in section 1.2 of the report, we brought to ESC for its subject expertise. You will have received, as mentioned in the committee, a briefing by Jackie Hurd, helping you to focus on some of the issues with ESC. And thank you, Jackie, for producing that. However, tonight, just emphasise for government reasons, you should refer to the published paper A6 when raising issues and making references. In Appendix 2 of A6, there's much good progress by officers in addressing issues in the budget working group recommendations 2023, which was presented by at the LT and Council, especially for tonight, items 2, 7, 12 and 13. Finally, can I make a plea that you make recommendations tonight, as these will be collated by Budget Working Group 2S OSC, the leadership team and council in 2024. But minuting as part of this meeting does not necessarily hold the same course to taken forward. The fact they were discussed here means they were discussed here. The fact they're recommendations means they're recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Well, I'll try and keep tabs on that. It's something for us to all consider. And the other thing is, the report in front of us goes much broader than ESC. Remember to keep questions to environmental communities items and not adult social care. Very important, though. It is. Right. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Would you like to introduce the report? Yeah.
Be happy to have 1 minute.
Please do.
Thank you. So just really, as you've already said, the focus of this evening is on the environmental aspects of the savings and growth items. Environment and communities also include some elements that isn't part of this scrutiny committee. But overall, if you look at environment and communities, we have a budget of just under 100 million. And what's possibly different to other departments is that 3/4 of that comes from income. A significant amount of that parking income, just over £50 million. And so the net budget is much smaller, still significant at around about 25 million and still requires savings, which is what this paper outlines. but the proposals we've got to scrutinise tonight bring in around £1.8 million of savings, but there are some growth items there of around 775,000. So that's just by way of a really quick introduction. I don't know if all committee members have met Lucy before, but Lucy oversees the various budgets within ENC, and we also have some of our directors where there's significant elements either for growth or for savings. And of course, Councillor Fellowson oversees the whole lot. I don't know if
my thanks, of course, to Sue and to Lucy and to everybody else who's contributed to this budget assessing process, and indeed to the Budget Scrutiny Working Group. I think the plans that we've set out have to strike a balance between the very ambitious commitments in the council plan and in the manifesto on which we're all elected. Not quite all of us in this room, but many of us in this room were elected. And also the financial challenges, which is going back to things like inflation and interest rates and the cost of borrowing, and how that's impacted our ability to deliver. And that's meant some very challenging decisions. But I'm pleased that we're protecting core services, so things like our investment in basically bin collections, in parks, in all of those sorts of things that Environment and Communities does so well. And at the same time, we're trying to modernise services like our parking service, which is a great example of a high volume, very visible service that residents really rely on, or at least a large plurality of them do. And so, I think this is a positive step forward in terms of budget assessment process. And I'd welcome feedback and questions.
Thank you very much. Feedback and questions.
Could you talk about CREST? Could you give us an update on where we are, obviously in relation to budget? But I suppose what I'd like to understand is in the short term, so maybe 6 months to a year, possibly 2 years, are there some upfront costs that maybe we haven't foreseen? I understand there have been some issues around pay and renegotiation of contracts and so on. So what's the impact in terms of getting that started? I think there's some IT investment coming down the line as well. And then in the longer term, are we envisaging savings as well as the sort of efficiencies that the whole programme is essentially designed to put in place as well? And then I suppose the specific question would also be around the number of officers in total. Are we seeking to reduce those, or are we actually looking to increase the number of potentially overall enforcement staff that we have available? Because I know that's something that consistently comes from residents. Actually, don't have enough enforcement capability. So potentially an update around the programme and where we see that going in terms of cost and in terms of its effectiveness.
A risk of making the question far too big. I'm just going to add to that. Is in consultant speak would say, do we know what good looks like? What are the do we have KPIs we're measuring it by? What will success look like? That's going.
So perhaps if I can kick off, I'm delighted that Andrew Burton, who now oversees this service, is here as well, so he might want to come in on some of the detail. There are no proposals to save money on CREST now. CREST has had various iterations, and I know Councillor Pascal was there right at the beginning, and we did save significant amounts right at the beginning by bringing together what was then a police offer that wasn't working terribly well because our police officers that we were paying for were being taken out of borough and used elsewhere. So there were some savings when we reduced the amount. We stopped that element and then had some more in-house staff. Those savings were a couple of years ago, and now the budget has remained constant. We do have some additional funds that have come in as one-off, and that was helped by Councillor Thamasitis for some more blitzes that we are undertaking this year, the results of which we are reporting, my successor will be reporting in 2024 about whether any of that should remain and be part of a growth fund. So as far as this is concerned, there's no new savings that we're proposing. The digital side, we are looking to invest some money to improve the customer experience and the ease of which people can report things, and also our frontline staff can then deal with that and respond to residents. We're still quantifying the exact cost of that, and if Andrew or Lucy have got further details on that, please speak, but we might need to come back to you on exactly what that is. As far as numbers are concerned, Andrew is closer to that than I am, and I'm going to say 26, but I think it's more than that. Andrew, over to you.
Join us.
Yeah, come in.
It's a spare seat, so I'll take a seat. Thank you. Yes, so Andrew Burton, Director of Transport and Regulatory Services. So since the 1st of November, I've been looking after the street enforcement team. The only foreseeable change at the moment is what we're talking about at the February meeting of the Select Committee, which was the longer enhancement in the summer hours. So we'll be looking at that for next summer, but that will be a standalone business case. So we will say, if you want to extend the enforcement till the early hours of the morning, after you have adjacent boroughs, then we'll come to you with what that will cost. At the moment, that's not on the table. The only material change is in the radio equipment which we're using at the moment. So we have quite old-fashioned radio equipment, and so we are at the moment putting together the attempt to buy better radio equipment. That wasn't in the budget, but I will find the savings within my larger direction to pay for it.
So I think we had. Is there going to be a trial of night wardens?
So night wardens are very expensive. That simply, they don't generate income. It's a deterrent. It's a cost. We have very few FBNs. There's very little. So it's a revenue cost. So simply, in the current financial range environment, we'll have to say this is what it will cost in order to extend beyond 11 p.m. Yeah. And it is very significant. It's a six-figure sum to have the meaningful. There's the other balance, which is between doing routine patrols like we do for parking wardens that walk around and they do a beat, as opposed to being entirely reactive, where we will get the service requests for our handheld devices, and we'll deploy the wardens or the street enforcement officers to each service request. So there's that balance which we're working on at the moment, and we'll come back in the. We've given ourselves 6 months for the team to become embedded, and then we will know exactly that balance between patrolling and reacting.
And I think we're bringing an update on CREST progress to the committee in March. 19th of March.
And we can also provide, then you asked about KPIs,
yeah.
So we can provide some further details on that. One of the KPIs is the number of FPMs that we've issued, and that's gone up significantly this year. But there are others now. We brought the wardens and previous waste and streets enforcement team together. There are other KPIs and tackling begging and various tools as well.
Yeah,
we can provide all of that.
I know it's because sometimes residents are more likely to report waste, for example, if they know it's going to be picked up and dealt with. So sometimes you improve things and you actually can get more complaints. But if we see it as a broad picture, I think that would be useful. Yes,
I think I would like to probe the whole
please do.
on the patrol and react a bit more like beyond the context of the budget discussion. We definitely want further discussion. So just to sum up then, there's no savings, revenue savings. So we're not increasing expenditure on hiring of new officers for the time being. There's just purely some capital spend on IT and site regulation.
And again, once the ward blitzes are complete in the summer, then before then we'll be coming back to say this has been a success or this hasn't been a success, and this is how you could continue this where additional funds available.
Alex, other questions? So I had a couple on specific items. First one is page 140, Notting Hill Carnival, where we're anticipating an increased cost. And this sort of goes back to when we had the item on Notting Hill Carnival. And we're discussing, I think it was with Terry, about the sort of growing costs of managing that carnival. And we recommended that, that was, which I think work had already started, but that was looked into some detail, how we mitigate that, whether there's, we go to the mayor or the national government, because we are effectively now hosting a national or even an international event. Is work proceeding on that?
So we're working with our strategic partners on looking at a longer term funding arrangement for the organizer as well. So then it's a much more stable arrangement, so they can look at funding and sponsorship for that as well. And the GLA are part of the discussions as well, and they have significantly increased the amount of funding equity, and that probably will continue for future years as well. But I agree, there needs to be some lobbying that goes into that kind of national event as well. So that's not something we've done at the moment, but it is on the to-do list.
Okay, great. Well, I think of a specific date, but at some point it would be good. Maybe by the March, certainly by the March meeting would be good to have an update on that.
And again, if that's a concern of the committee, it would be very helpful to have that minuted, and then Terry, at your strategic meetings, you can then raise that, say, the committee's rules.
Yeah, that'd be beneficial. Minute that as a recommendation, that'd be great.
And some fairly granular work was undertaken by Lucy and Terry and the team around what those costs are. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Lucy, perhaps you could update a little bit more, but as part of that growth is to do with inflationary costs that are part of what we previously considered. So the grants remain the same, no costs.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, part of the provision for the carnival is contracts down, so toilets and so on. And every time we go out to tender, those costs are going up. So there's quite a significant increase actually in the cost of that provision this year. And of course, staffing costs go up, although that is corporately funded. But actually, if we need to do external kind of support in the short term, that's more expensive as well. So we have been through, as I say, quite a granular level. And also looking at income, and so there's very careful calculations around the street trading fees, and we've been sort of very careful to make sure that we're recharging, as much as we can there, so that we're really recovering our costs of providing those fees, but actually it's still not going to cover the costs.
Okay.
And we're looking at increasing the amount of street trading potentially that goes on in Carnival as well, just so we can increase the income as well, because there's wider streets where we feel we could expand street trading offer. So that should help the budget.
Well, it'd be great if you could include that in the update. That would be really good. Yes.
First point of slight strange, but we've already agreed under the previous item that the hypothecated provision in regards to Fund Zero is a recommendation from that item. But I suppose strictly for governance reasons, can we agree that there's a recommendation from this discussion as well, without going back through all the detail? Because it does affect the budget working group recommendation 7 last year, and it's a major follow-up piece, and it's to do with £100 million of expenditure. So, look, if we could just say that it's a recommended from this, but this item,
any file and
to the budget working group as well as to the other thing I wanted to raise was another issue that came up last year, was that of food waste, because this is I have to declare I'm a board member of the WRWA, which is the body that takes 6 million tonnes of rubbish from the river and burns it, and on behalf of council. The question is where we see the food waste issue going, and if that's going to be new rubbish trucks, if we do that, it's going to be a different waste stream. It's not piloted now, but we have been thinking of doing it across the borough, and then how we're going to dispose of it, whether we do it by anaerobic digestion or some other technology. But these have big cost implications, budgetary implications. So this stage, rather than going into too much detail, it's a question of whether we would agree that we recommend that the leadership team focus on this subject.
So there's some good news on food waste costs. So the government, as part of the Environment Act, has basically said the new burden payments will cover costs incurred by local authorities to increase food waste collections. And that was basically any cost incurred from March this year. So they've just announced that they would fund retrospectively. So any new vehicles or crews will be covered by that cost. Another bit of positive news is that we're actually getting zero gate fee for our food waste at the moment as well. So we pay 160 something £5, I think it is, for a ton of general waste, which most food waste is if we don't have a separate collection. But now we've got £0 per ton for food waste, and that's a kind of just an informal arrangement that we have for as long as we need it, to be fair. So there's a considerable savings of £160 plus for each ton of food waste saving.
Happy? Yeah. Absolutely. Yes, Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. My question is on the environmental education. It says there will be an increase from £76 to £92 for 2-hour staff-led sessions. It also mentions there is a 12.5 discount for. So I just want to know, number one, is the discount for 12.5% only for schools?
What page is that?
So basics.
So it's additional papers with fees and charges.
Yeah. I think this discounts are relying on the schools. What about local organizations, charities, what kids? I think we should be encouraging environmental education across the age groups.
Yeah, I'll have to get back to you on that. I do know there's a reduction for council schools, and that's at RBKC schools that there is a reduced figure. I'll pick up with the ecology team tomorrow.
It's a high percentage increase in terms of actual pounds. It's 113 to 125, so it's not a huge sort of monetary increase. But yeah, if you could provide a bit of information on that, Terry, that'd be great. Other questions? Yes, Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask, possibly Terry, about these new waste collection vehicles, the electric one. How are they being funded? Are they being funded by the council's actual budget, or are they being funded via ENSA?
They're funded through ENSA. My understanding of it. So there's 5 buggies that are being introduced, and then it's looking at the wards that have made the NSIL bids, and that's for the buggy and for the driver, and then you can hopefully share that out between different wards as well as neighbouring wards, as well as for the ward that funds it. So we're in agreement with the ward councils.
That's the sole plan at the moment for funding electric waste collection vehicles. Presumably, in the longer term, if we are planning to replace the fleet, we can also it in science.
Yeah, so that's what that's describing is the small electric ones, which you hate to say it wasn't. They've got to be used regularly. So no, for the actual main waste fleet, that's a capital investment. So we're talking quite a few million for replacing the whole waste fleet. That's just to add on to the existing kind of service that we provide, and that's to try and do some more rapid response work. So it's not service that we have provided in the past. Yeah. It's like an offer to the ward council.
Yeah, it's additional.
Yeah.
If we do want to, if we want to green our waste fleet, that will need to be a new capital bid, and it will be drawn from the same pool of resources that we talked about in terms of buildings earlier, and street lighting and all of the other kind of net zero ambitions that we have. These e-buggies are something I understand the Lead Member for Planning and Public Realm is very keen on, but at the moment there isn't revenue associated with their management and the capital costs of one way and so that is something at the moment if wards want to invest and they have to do it in that way, mindful of those constraints. Right now, that's a short-term funding model, but it's not something that wards can rely on for a period of several years, as the current budgets are set up.
Must be 5 is a good number to just trial, see whether they are effective. And then if they are really effective and popular and solve some of the waste issues, then we can look at expanding that. But at the moment, it is through NSIL funding. And there is a capital bid for the replacement of the actual.
So I know we've already asked for information on the plan for transforming the waste fleet. But is there a particular date where they're all planned to finish their life?
We phase it for that reason. So there's most vehicles.
We're not going to nip. There's not an upcoming deadline.
No. The next the next batch of vehicles needs to be replaced in about 2 years' time. That's about 18 vehicles, and that's a considerable chunk of the RCVs.
Yeah.
There, so that's then it gets a smaller chunk after that.
Yeah.
Small question, if I may. All this investment we do in new vehicles, these are all fully deployed by the council, not sewers. Sewers is purely operating them, essentially.
They operate and maintain them. We buy them. But we do work in partnership with Suez, so we get their preferential rates when we buy them.
Please, other questions? I had a couple more items. So on 148, there's one of the large savings, maybe the largest is 2%. I think it's staffing costs. When can we expect more detail on what that looks like? That's quite high level at the moment.
So we're undertaking some work this side of Christmas. And again, that will be something that my successor could bring back in 2024. But as you say, the detail isn't there yet. We're confident we can realise that element of savings. But the reason that we haven't worked through the equalities implications is we don't know specifically which teams that's going to impact until we undertaking further work and see where there's the most amount of potential to reduce workforce costs.
Okay. Well, is that something we'd recommend budget working group to look into?
You can do, yes, absolutely, and it's quite a large sum of money. So I think that it would have presumably be a question of what further savings can be made, or what KPIs, or if you're going to save a lot of money on salaries, is this going to harm the service or not? And how do you measure that?
Yes, the impact.
And
what about the transformation conversation we had?
Well, it's very interesting you should mention it. Transformation is really my question today, which is do you have,
as ever we're in lockstep.
Do you have a transformation perspective? I know, Sue, sadly we're losing youth, but is your strategy you're handing over to your successor? And what stage do you think you have to start thinking about transformation?
Well, I would suggest now, and that there is now a refreshed work programme that Councillor Thamasides has just referred to, where specific ED executive directors will be championing specific areas, and AI is one. So the whole potential with artificial intelligence and what on the impact that's going to have on the workforce is one. A fundamental review again of fees and charges is another. So there's a list of overarching transformational programme and ED sponsors that will take that forward. So we are looking at that. What we don't want to do, because when you look at staff savings, it can involve consultation if we're actually reducing numbers. What you don't want to do is be doing that in a kind of 12-month cycle. What you want to be doing is having a sort of 3 to 5 year programme of which areas you're going to focus on, and then make transformational fundamental changes, let that bed in. So that is the programme that we're working on for Christmas, myself and Lucy and the director.
Chair, would it be possible to turn this into a recommendation in the sense that, taking on board what's been said, that this group would like to recommend that budget working group is briefed, or this committee and budget working group is briefed on transformations within the next 6 months or something, that's all?
Yeah, I assume that's a reasonable time frame.
Yeah, I think so.
So yeah, briefs on transformations, and then also specifically within that, the sort of plans for those 2% savings. And I think we need to see how we're going to minimise impact on frontline services.
Because in the overall presentation that John, you and colleagues, our financial colleagues, gave on the budget, he basically said this year, by this year I mean the year coming up.
Yeah,
the year afterwards, we were going to have to start implementing transformations because that's when we need to make bigger cuts.
Yeah.
So the recommendation is to you guys to present to this.
Progress against that.
Yeah.
I understand, and it's correctly identified that 25/6 is the hardest year financially in the medium term financial plan.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to that. So in about 6 months, or within 6 months, briefing on that progress, both to budget working group and probably bring it to the committee, and then we can decide whether we bring it as an item or if it's just a written briefing. Yes,
One quick question. This is on again the additional favors on page 13. There was also a increase of percent value charges. There will be an increase of 7.5% on 1 year reserve value. I mean, why is that?
Where's this?
All this on page 13, Johnny, the additional values.
Okay, so, that's a 12-month.
Yes.
Yeah, 12 months, 37.5% increase. When we have said last year, used to fund the carnival.
Should I try to briefly explain that one? So the council's policy has been to freeze the charge per gram per kilometre of CO2 for the last couple of years. And so when the parking services look to set revised charges for the year ahead, this year the parking service is proposing 8%, which is based on September RPI. So they've looked at the average cost of a permit based on the average cost for a vehicle, which is calculated on its CO2 emissions. And so to achieve an 8% increase from the current cost of that average permit and the revised cost, they have to look at how they increase the base. And so the increase of the base looks enormous, but actually it should only be a few pounds if every other charge above that the CO2 emissions is frozen.
Well,
that's why I'm charging.
And why was the decision not just have an 8% increase on both grams per kilometre and on the base? Why did we weight the increase on the base and not the grams per kilometre?
This was a policy decision from the lead member.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, the lead member would have made that choice, but equally it's out of consultation at the moment. So should there be strong views, you're welcome to respond and make the case for a different approach.
Okay. Councillor Duran.
And I just want to make a general point about staffing. If there are to be losses in over numbers of staff, hopefully some of that can be mitigated by transformations, new technology and AI. We're also going to be replacing them by AI at some point. But I think Councillor Burke rightly said, frontline services, frontline services clearly are what we want to protect first of all. But equally, there's quite a lot in the background as well. We've discussed the whole range of projects this evening. Will need to be extra time to review and to actually deliver. So if there are to be losses in some of those areas, I think, which may be inevitable in the financial situation, we should at least have a clear understanding of what that means in terms of our capability to deliver certain projects. I mean, take something incredibly minor, like small funding projects, for example. Yeah, so okay, a number officer hours to actually deliver. So it's if you are not, if you're going to be less able to deliver certain projects, be they larger or small, we should at least be aware of that, so we can set expectations for ourselves and the residents. If the financial circumstances are in the context to that.
I agree. And incredible is exactly the word. The amount of officer hours that can sometimes aid to a planting project. But I suppose we are all armed with the council plan, which gives us the framework for what we want to prioritise. And so when we consider how we will manage transformation and reductions in headcount, that's kind of the prism through which we'll look. And at the same time, you know, relative to some other local authorities, we are pretty well staffed in terms of the basic position. Now, obviously, in many ways, that's a good thing. It makes us a fantastic employer and it contributes to fantastic service. But the financial context is changing and has changed. And so we need to operate within that. It's not a nice thing, but it's kind of where a lot of local authorities now are.
I had a question on Chelsea Bridge, page 157, which I think I raised briefly at OSC. I said that I would bring to ESC, and here I am, true to my word. So that's, I raise it because it is a substantial amount of money, particularly in 25-26. 6 million and 7.7 million pounds.
Nevertheless, could the committee join me in recommending that we welcome that it's a sum far less than this being spent on Hammersmith Bridge, because we are working proactively. And could we adopt that as a recommendation that we do everything in our power to reject that kind of mismanagement in West London?
But I think it's absolutely true that proactive maintenance is a hallmark of this council. However, I do, as I said in OSC, I do think it's worth looking into the details of the contract, and maybe Wandsworth is spending the same amount on Albert Bridge or whichever bridge is under their jurisdiction. But if we are funding substantial amounts more because of particular issues with this bridge, it's worth at least going back for the sake of £12 million. It's worth going back over that contract in some detail to see if there is any way to reclaim exceptional charges. So it could be, we'll put that as a recommendation just to review that.
Quite right, but can we also note that Wandsworth Bridge was shut for 10 weeks over the summer? It's funny you mentioned that, because that is a significant cause of concern to residents across KMC.
Yeah,
and I think the committee would be well advised to.
It has, yeah, it does have huge knock-on effects, and to keep you happy, Councillor Palace, we will recommend that the council continues to pride itself on proactive maintenance to prevent disruption to residents.
It's a recommendation to the budget.
Yes, yeah, I think that makes sense to bring that to the budget working group. Yes, please, I make a note of that. So Chelsea Bridge, yeah. And the other one I had was on fees, which was around some of our fees for events. And in this case, it's Leighton House, but the point is a bit broader. Page 9 of the fees paper. So yeah, cost of dinner. And this is not me declaring an interest, because I want to have dinner in the garden room of Leighton House. But the cost of dinner, reception, garden room.
I'm sure chance would be a fine thing.
You were, exactly. Well, you're welcome to invite me. So I was at Leighton House last weekend, actually, which is why this sort of jumped out at me. And so it's a shame that dinner in Narcissus Hall is no longer available, because it is an incredible room. And I just wonder, over all of this, are we doing enough to advertise these? So question one is, are we doing enough to advertise these services? Because it is a really unique place, and I would have thought there would be significant demand if properly advertised. And secondly, on the weddings, how are we ensuring, because is that in the evenings people can rent out for weddings? Because most weddings are in the summer on Saturday, which is when most people want to go to the museum?
Really good question. So there's a whole new website and a whole marketing campaign around the museums now. So hopefully people do know that the room is available for hire. There's certainly a section on the website there, and there's a dedicated team to deal with that museum as well. And there's really ambitious business model associated with the museums now, where we are looking to maximise income as well. So, and events are a key part of that. And the events do always just take place outside of kind of normal operating hours, where possible. So the majority of those do.
Yeah. But can we just make sure that we're, it's fantastic that we're getting that information from one place, make it easily accessible, but just sort of sending that information out to major wedding planners and event planners and that sort of thing, which is be quite an easy thing to do.
We're tied in with the registrars as well, so links in with Chelsea Town Hall and things like that. So you can see the whole offer across the whole borough.
The whole RBKC package. Colleagues, other questions on budget papers? No?
Can I, on the subject of fees, invite the committee also to recommend that we abhor the 1,800% increase in some parking fees in Labour and Western City Council next door, and no proportionate increases that Kensington and Chelsea recommend.
I think we probably personally do abhor those, but it's beyond the remit of this committee. I would suggest that to make a specific recommendation around it. But thank you for that. And the other thing, just before we wrap up, we have to say a thank you and a goodbye to Sue. It was our last time I'll have you at ESC, but it's always been a pleasure to have you, and thank you for everything you've done for this committee and scrutiny in general.
Thank you for all the questions. Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. You're still welcome to keep on tuning in on YouTube if you miss us. Let me just wrap that paper up before we finish. So, and do call out if I've forgotten anything. But we've got the CREST paper in any case coming to the March committee. And so we said that will include sort of specific KPIs we're looking at for the success of that programme. We want the plans on cost mitigation and additional revenue income for Carnival to come to the be provided to us by the March meeting. We might not take that as a formal item, but to be committee to be updated on that. I don't think that one needs to go to budget working group. Will, does it? No, I don't think so.
That's up to you whether you do.
No, I don't think that's necessary. And then we're just noting that the net zero offset recommendation we made against item A5 also applies to item A6. And that update will go to the budget working group as well. We'd like a bit more information on the environmental education fees and how we're just making sure that that remains affordable. The increase, we want an update on, sort of briefing on progress of the transformation work, including the plans for the 2% salaries savings to come to budget working group. Yes.
Do you want to make that recommendation to budget working group as well? It's just that transformation is something that's a big budget.
Yeah.
Especially coming up. We want to make a general recommendation. The leadership team focus on transformation work now, rather than brilliant timing. I know that the leadership team and the officers are looking at it.
Yeah,
it's really a question of
I think
that they speed up their work, because it seems rather tight if we're going to try to get it into the 25/6 budget. But actually, if the work doesn't start now, I know you said now work starts now, but I think in the context of the leadership team and the council, that needs to be supported by recommendations.
I think, our remit is around everything within ASC, so I think we are doing that effectively by asking for a briefing on the progress. It's a recommendation to, if there's nothing in that report, then it's clear that nothing's moved forward.
Right. I mean, it's just that the issue of transformations is certainly something that I think Budget Working Group ought to consider. Whether ESC wants to make a recommendation to Budget Working Group, that's.
Right, so the recommendation is for there to be a briefing on the progress of transformation work, including the detail of how we're making those 2% salary cuts. And the recommendation is both for this committee to be briefed on it, but also for the Budget Working Group to be briefed on it, consideration, please. And then the final two items was a recommendation to look into the Chelsea Bridge costs in more detail and the contract around that. And I just wrote proactive. To agree that the council should continue to be proactive in its maintenance works to minimise disruption to residents. Colleagues, anything I missed? Anything I'd like to add? No? Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Sue, in particular. And bring that item to a close.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ron. So it's, yeah, just a work programme. So is everyone happy to agree the work programme report as tabled? Any comments or questions? Agreed? So that's A7 agreed, and that's the last item, isn't it? Well, thank you all very much. Bring the meeting to a close.